Happy Monday, everybody. The topic I'm going to talk about today is eating disorders in pregnancy. I decided to address this one because this is my area of expertise. I have been a direct entry midwife for almost 11 years now. 10 years, I guess. But I've been in the field for about 11 years. And eating disorders in pregnancy is actually one of the topics that I am researching, and I presented at a midwifery conference in October this year about this topic. So since somebody asked a question about eating disorders, I think the specific question was, how will their eating disorder affect their pregnancy? And also, they're afraid of having a relapse during pregnancy. And these are two really real concerns because, for one, if your body's already been compromised, it very well could affect your pregnancy. Some of the complications that can happen, people with a history of bulimia, for example, even if they're recovered and have been recovered for a long time, they have a higher rate of miscarriage, of stillbirth, and of other pregnancy complications. Anorexia, people have a history of anorexia tend to have lower birth weight babies, more premature babies, stillbirth, miscarriage, and more infertility problems. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Some of this is because with eating disorders, our hormones are affected, and sometimes our reproductive organs are affected as well. Also, an interesting fact that people that have at least anorexia have a higher rate of being born as low birth weight infants themselves and have been born to premature infants themselves. So that's an interesting finding. Unfortunately, the statistics out there are kind of few and far between. And so, I can give you these numbers, but the reality is there needs to be a lot more studies done on this subject. And I'm hoping that eventually I'll be able to do some of that. But one of the concerns is, I would say, first of all, your emotional stability. If you're thinking about becoming pregnant, then it's good that you're thinking about this before you become pregnant, because once you are pregnant, then, you have to deal with it, and it could be a lot harder. And I'm not saying that people with eating disorders shouldn't get pregnant. I've got 3 kids myself, but there are some things that you might want to consider. And first of all, you're going to need a lot of support. And so it just depends on where you're at in your recovery. I would say if you're at a point where you're still struggling a lot, you may want to consider putting off getting pregnant until you're at a place where you're more stable, where you've worked through some issues, because body image issues especially come up with body changes. Weight gain is normal in pregnancy, and some people have a hard time with this. One of the things that I do with my clients, if I know that they have body issues especially, or history of eating disorders, is I actually give them the option of being weighed or not, because I feel like weight itself is not a huge indicator of how well somebody's pregnancy is going. We'd like to see people gain between 25 to 35 pounds for a single pregnancy. With twins, we like to see them gain up to 50 pounds, and that may seem like a lot of weight, but you have to consider that your blood volume doubles during pregnancy, or not doubles, but goes up by about 50%, and your water distribution is different. You do put on a little bit of fat reserve because biologically your body's getting ready for breastfeeding, and whether you're going to breastfeed or not, your body still makes those preparations, because it actually takes more energy to produce milk to breastfeed a baby than it does when you're pregnant. You actually need more calories when you're breastfeeding than during your pregnancy. Vitamin deficiencies can be a critical thing. What a lot of times what we find is, if you're not getting the nutrients you need, most likely, in most cases, your baby's going to be fine. What's going to happen, though, is it's going to compromise your health even more. And there can be complications with the baby, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, your body will actually favor the baby over you when it comes to health. And so if you're not getting what you need, it's going to take the calcium from your bones. It's going to take the nutrient it needs from your reserves, and so you're going to become deficient, and then you're going to be the one that has health problems, and this can lead to complications like low amniotic fluid. It could be high blood pressure. It could be intrauterine growth restriction, which would affect the baby. Toxemia or preeclampsia. There's liver function problems, kidney function problems. And then just later, a greater risk of osteoporosis, a greater risk of birth complications. Emotional issues do affect the labor and birth process, and when a person's not able to relax or has a lot of fears around birth, the rate of complications goes up quite a bit. So those are some of the things to consider. One of the things that some of the studies that I've looked at found is that a lot of times people, when they have eating disorders, most people, they'll do anything for their children, and so most likely people won't relapse during pregnancy, but where the greatest risk is right after pregnancy, postpartum, because then it's like the baby's out and you want to get that weight off, and it took you 9 months to put on that weight. Sometimes you put on a lot more weight than you wanted to, and you have the baby, and some people don't lose any weight, and you're probably not going to lose all the weight, everything, that you just gained during pregnancy, and it can take 9 months to a year to get that back to normal. Some people, breastfeeding takes care of that, and because when you're breastfeeding, your metabolism's higher, and so a lot of people lose weight from breastfeeding. Not everybody, but quite a few people. But that's where the greatest risk of relapse is. Also, people with eating disorders tend to have higher rates of depression during pregnancy, about 40 to 50%, as opposed to about 10%, and then postpartum, about 75% of people with eating disorders will develop postpartum depression, as opposed to about 20 to 30% of people that don't have eating disorders. So that's a huge risk, and it's something to watch out for, and it's something to talk to your provider about during pregnancy. If you experience symptoms of depression during pregnancy, there's a much greater chance that you're going to have that depression postpartum, and if you have postpartum depression, the longer it goes, the more risk it becomes of becoming chronic depression if you don't already have chronic depression, that can last for years, or and a lot of it's just those hormonal balances. A lot of times I'll have my moms take things like omega-3 fatty acids, sometimes progesterone creams if it's needed, although I would talk to your provider before you start adjusting some of that stuff. If you want to do it more natural, consult like a naturopath or somebody that's familiar with that can work with you. I can't over the internet tell you what will work for your body because I don't know your history, and so I can't say, oh yes, this will fix it, because it's a lot more complicated than that, and sometimes medication's needed, sometimes nutritional things is in addition to medication is needed. It just really depends on the person, but you just really have to be proactive during pregnancy and after pregnancy. And so if you're thinking about it before pregnancy, you might want to think about some of these things and how you're going to deal with it and line up that support. And I would say, make sure you have somewhere to process, whether that's a group, whether that's in therapy. And I think it's a good idea to probably be in therapy if you have those issues, even if it's just to check in like once a month if you feel like you're doing fine. But especially postpartum, just to monitor how things are going. Most people with postpartum depression don't realize that they're depressed. I had pretty severe postpartum depression, and I'm a midwife, but even me, myself, I didn't recognize with each of my children that I had depression, and it got worse every time, and finally, by the time I had my last baby, it was almost unmanageable, but, and that's one of the contributing factors that made me really relapse, was that I had a continuing depression that lasted for a few years beyond when she was born. So get on top of it right away. Get a support system around you, and I think you can get pregnant, and you can be a good parent. You just have to have an awareness. So you don't have to be perfect to be a parent, but to have an awareness and to continue to work on things yourself will help you out a lot. So I hope that helps.